My kidnapper let me go after 90 days because, according to him, I was too much work. 3 years and 2 days later, he stood at an altar and married my sister. At 6:12 in the morning on October 6th, 2019, I was sitting barefoot beside a truck scale outside Zanesville, Ohio. The scale belonged to an Ohio Department of Transportation weigh station that hadn't opened yet. Semis hissed past on Interstate 70, throwing grit against the guardrail, and I kept trying to push my feet into socks that were sealed inside a clear specimen bag. The bag said, Cedarvale Rehabilitation, Hydrotherapy, Lot 19-071. My wrists had fresh gauze around them. I was wearing gray rehab scrubs that weren't mine. My hair had been cut to my jaw with something dull, and one side was longer than the other. Every few seconds, I checked the road behind me because my body hadn't understood yet that the van was gone. He'd left me alive. Before driving away, the man in the mask had held up one of his printed cards. Too much work. Then he tapped the words with one gloved finger, like I'd failed an employee review. I knew what he meant. I'd clogged the drain with mattress foam. I'd broken 3 feeding trays. I'd memorized his steps in the hall and faked 2 seizures. On day 74, I dislocated my left pinky trying to pull my hand through a restraint. So I accepted the insult as an answer. I told myself I had outlasted him. I had made keeping me harder than dumping me on the side of the highway. That belief gave me something small and hard to hold on to while the first state trooper wrapped me in a silver emergency blanket and asked me my name 3 times. It was wrong. Briar Glen. Memory care was the kind of place where every sound had a reason. Call pendants chirped in pairs. Ice machines coughed at 2 in the morning. The west elevator made a soft clunk between the 2nd and 3rd floors, and residents who'd forgotten their children could still recognize that noise. My mother built Briar Glen in Westerville in 1998. 96 beds, 2 enclosed courtyards, and wallpaper in the dining room that she called buttercream, even though it looked yellow to everyone else. She died from an aneurysm 18 months before I disappeared. After that, my sister Paige and I owned the business together. 50. I handled resident care and compliance. Paige handled vendors, payroll, insurance, and anything involving a spreadsheet with more than 4 columns. She was 28, 3 years younger than me, and better at speaking to banks without sounding like she wanted to apologize for calling. I worked 4 therapy shifts a week because I liked the part of the job that made sense. A walker was too low. You raised it. A hand was stiff. You warmed it. A woman named Mrs. Donnelly couldn't press her call button because of arthritis. So you found another way. Miles Keene found another way. He worked for Mid-State Clinical Systems, the company that serviced our badge readers, nurse call pendants, wandering alarms, and camera controllers. He was 35, lean, clean-shaven, and always looked as if he'd washed his hands 30 seconds earlier. His contractor badge read MCS 4417. The first time I noticed him, he was kneeling beside Mrs. Donnelly's bed with a screwdriver between his teeth. He moved her call button from the wall rail to the left side of her blanket clip, then changed the pressure settings so she could trigger it with her thumb. "Try that," he said. She pressed once. The hall light blinked. "Well, look at me," she said. "Queen of the castle." Miles bowed from the waist. That was how he worked. Never flashy, never familiar enough to annoy you. He remembered which residents hated overhead lights, and he carried 2 kinds of peppermint in his tool bag because Mr. Alvarez insisted the striped ones tasted like toothpaste. During an ice storm, Paige's phone died while she was arguing with an oxygen supplier. Miles handed her a new charger still wrapped in a rubber band. "Keep it," he said. "I've got 6. He once stayed 47 minutes after his service window to get our east elevator running. before a dialysis man arrived. He didn't bill us. Paige tried to make him take a sandwich from the staff refrigerator, and he chose the turkey one no one else wanted. That detail still bothers me. Not because it mattered, because I remember it. His kindness was useful. That made it easy to trust. Miles also knew how to make access sound like safety. He photographed door frames to document old wiring. He asked for shift schedules so he could test alerts during low traffic periods. He suggested keeping vendor passwords in one emergency binder because corporate support took too long after hours. Paige approved it. When he replaced backup lines, he marked them with fluorescent orange heat shrink tubing. Every piece was cut to the same length, 32 millimeters, because Miles liked things uniform. I saw a handful of those orange sleeves lined up beside his Klein wire strippers one afternoon, and asked if he measured them. With the first one, he said. After that, muscle memory. Then he smiled and went back to work. We also owned Cedar Vale Rehabilitation, Annex, a 42-room building 23.7 miles away. It had closed years earlier. The therapy pool was drained, the roof leaked near radiology, and the hydro room still had stainless sinks with elbow handles. Paige wanted to sell it. I didn't. At least not for what buyers were offering. The land sat near a new medical corridor, and our last appraisal came in at $6.2 million. Paige called that number imaginary. I called a $3.8 million offer insulting. Miles serviced Cedar Vale's old system before any buyer tours. He was there often enough that no one questioned his van in the lot. That was the point. On July 8, 2019, I took an overnight shift because one of our therapists had norovirus. At 2:17 in the morning, my pager sent me to a possible resident fall in Wing C, Hydro Suite 4B. The wording was odd. At Briar Glen, we called that corridor Hydro 4. Hydro Suite 4B was old language from the original 1998 plans. I assumed the software had pulled an outdated label after one of Miles's updates. I grabbed a gate belt and went anyway. As I reached the closed therapy corridor, a wandering alarm fired on the floor above me. A nurse named Janelle cursed over the radio and ran toward the stairwell. At the same time, both badge readers beside me clicked green. No swipe. The overhead cameras went dark for 86 seconds. I didn't know that number then. I learned it from the report. Inside the corridor, the lights were off. Lemon floor cleaner covered something sharper underneath, almost like pool chemicals, but not quite. I called out once. No answer. Just static. The door behind me shut. An arm locked across my chest. Another hand pulled the gate belt from my fingers and snapped it around my elbows. I kicked backward and hit a shin. The person grunted. A needle punched through my scrub pants near my hip. I remember the floor tilting. Then laundry. White sheets were piled over my face, hot from the dryer, and a wheel squeaked every third turn beneath me. The loading dock door opened with its 2-note chime. Cold air hit my ankles. After that, nothing. I woke in a hospital bed bolted through tile. The room had no windows. There was a stainless sink, a square floor drain, and smoked plastic over a camera in the ceiling. The electronic lock made a deep click every time someone entered. Behind the wall, an old ventilation fan rattled for 9 seconds, stopped, then started again. Lock had been removed. My captor wore a silicone mask with blank cheeks and pale lips. He didn't explain anything. Most of the time, he didn't speak at all. He used cards printed in block letters. Heat, hands visible. Step back. The lights came on at 6:30 each morning and shut off at 10 each night. Food arrived every 6 hours on beige Cedar Vale trays. Every 7th day, he weighed me on a mechanical scale and wrote the number on a clipboard. The camera reset at 3:04 every Tuesday morning. 7 seconds of black. That became my calendar. On day 11, I packed mattress foam into the floor drain and ran the sink until water spread under the bed. On day 19, I smeared mashed peas into the camera housing. On day 37, I bit through an oxygen tube he'd left beside the wall and hid the metal connector under my tongue. He found it. After that, I got no blanket for 2 nights. There was no ransom message, no speech about religion, no pattern I could use. He didn't ask me to love him or apologize to him. He just kept me on a schedule. That frightened me more than rage would have. I started measuring the room with my body. 7 heel-to-toe steps from the bed to the sink, 4 from the sink to the door. The drain cover had 6 screws, but the one nearest the wall sat slightly higher than the others. I worked at it with the sharpened edge of a glucose strip until my thumbnail split. Blood kept making the plastic slippery. Food became information. Applesauce meant Monday. Powdered eggs meant Thursday. On Sundays, the tray held a sealed cup of cranberry juice from Cisco. 8 ounces, exactly. I kept the foil lids under the mattress until Derek found them and made me stand facing the N wall while he searched every seam. Once, maybe day 52, I pretended to stop breathing. He pressed 2 fingers to my neck and called someone through the pager. The reply came fast. He tilted the card toward the camera before showing it to me. No hospital. Rage slips. Schedules don't. At first, the police thought the answer was Travis Red. So did I. Travis was my former fiancé and Briar Glen's old facilities supervisor. 5 months before I was taken, I found $18,600 in sports betting debt he'd hidden from me. He'd also opened 3 loans against the account we were using for our wedding. I ended the engagement at a restaurant near Polaris Parkway. He followed me into the parking lot, crying first, then shouting. Afterward, he left 7 voicemails. The last one ran 2 minutes and 43 seconds. He said I had humiliated him. He said I'd taken the life he was supposed to have. He said I would regret making him look small. Paige saved every message. When detectives came to the house, she gave them a 27-page dossier. Screenshots, debts, work records, copies of the voicemails. The pages had a faint crescent-shaped toner shadow near the lower right corner because her HP. Office printer had been smearing for months. I'd complained about it once. She told me toner drums were highway robbery. Travis had motive. He also had opportunity, at least on paper. His old badge was never officially destroyed. He knew the blind spot by our loading dock. He'd inspected Cedar Vale. He owned a white 2014 Ford Transit like the one caught on a traffic camera near Briar Glen. Then he vanished from Ohio 11 days before I did. Inside that room, my captor used things Travis knew. My childhood nickname. My fear of deep water. The exact restaurant where I ended our engagement. One afternoon, he left a Cincinnati Bengals cap on the sink. Travis owned 3. I stared at it until my eyes hurt. The camera stared back. The man behind the mask later played a recording made from Travis's voicemails. The words came in chopped pieces, some too loud, some barely audible. You made me. A click. A look small. Another click. You'll regret. Then silence. It felt obvious. Ugly, but obvious. 41 days after I disappeared, detectives searched Travis's storage unit. They found my navy scrub top inside a contractor bag, 3 empty midazolam vials, medical restraint webbing, and an 11 by 17 Cedar Vale floor plan with hydro suite, 4B, circled in black ink. A stain on the scrub top matched my blood type. His laptop had searches for windowless rooms, sedative duration, missing person death declarations, and disabling Honeywell badge readers. A white transit using his plate number had visited the unit at 11:38 at night, 3 nights before I was taken. To everyone watching the news, the case was done. News stations ran. Travis's booking photograph beside my school picture. Reporters parked outside Briar Glen and filmed residents through the courtyard fence. One anchor called the unit a torture cache. Paige gave a statement on the front steps. She wore my mother's navy wool coat, even though it was 71 degrees. Miles stood just outside the camera frame, holding a bottle of water with the cap already loosened for her. I saw that clip months later. Paige's hand shook when she reached for the bottle. At the time, everyone read it as grief. I did too. Detectives also found a disposable phone taped beneath a shelf in Travis's unit. It contained only one incoming text. She'll break by week 6. The number had been routed through 3 prepaid accounts. The sentence sounded like him. That was the trick. It sounded like the worst thing he might say, so no one asked who had chosen the wording. Miles helped Paige through all of it. He installed cameras at her house for free. He drove her to the evidence review because she said she couldn't face the storage unit alone. When detectives struggled with Cedar Vale's old access diagrams, Miles stood beside a whiteboard and translated the wiring paths. Paige started calling him our lifeline. I didn't know that until later. From my room, the clues kept pointing toward Travis. A red rolling tool chest appeared in the hall. The Bengals cap stayed on the sink for 6 days. My captor's instruction cards repeated phrases from the voicemails. I decided Travis had hired someone. Maybe he was too afraid to touch me himself. Maybe he wanted to watch from somewhere clean. I was close in one respect, just not about Travis. My release should have made the case stronger. Instead, it broke it apart. By the time police followed my directions to Cedar Vale, the room had been stripped. The bed bolts were gone. The camera housing had been removed. Chemicals had been poured through the drain. The electronic lock controller had been wiped. All of that happened within 94 minutes of the van leaving me at the way station. Then federal agents confirmed Travis had been aboard a Great Lakes survey vessel since June 27th. The MV North Passage had biometric safety checks every day. Crew records placed him on deck, in the engine room, or asleep in his assigned bunk throughout my kidnapping. The ship hadn't docked. His actual van was sitting inside a locked marina lot in Minnesota. Someone had cloned his Ohio plate. The blood on my scrub top wasn't from me. It was a quality control sample stolen from Briar Glen's lab refrigerator. Same type, wrong anticoagulant. The batch had been prepared 6 months after my last blood draw. The midazolam vials came from a delivery made 9 days after Travis left Ohio. Even the photograph found in his unit wasn't his. It had been cropped from Paige's private social media archive. His laptop searches were inserted during a remote backup session using Briar Glen's vendor network. The software license ended in 4417, the same number on Miles's badge. Investigators treated it as a seat number at first. Midstate had hundreds of licenses. It could have belonged to anyone in the company. Miles said as much. He also gave them a list of former Cedar Vale employees who might have retained keys. For the first time, I had no suspect to hate. Travis had been cruel after our breakup, but he hadn't touched the kidnapping. He hadn't supplied information. He hadn't even entered Cedar Vale after losing his job. Someone had chosen him because his worst behavior came pre-packaged. That was harder to accept. A 1.5 years passed before they found Derek Boone. A partial thumbprint had survived beneath the adhesive rim of one feeding tray. Derek was 46. A former Cedar Vale night orderly fired for stealing fentanyl patches. Agents searched his property near Newark and found silicone masks, hospital restraints, a discontinued master key, and $38,400 sealed inside coffee cans. The red tool chest was in his garage. When they showed me his booking photo, I recognized the shape of his hands before I recognized his face. Thick fingers. a scar across the right thumb, the hand that had pressed my shoulder into the mattress. Derek admitted he'd been in the room. He delivered food, weighed me, replaced restraints, injected medication from printed instructions. He received $400 a day and a $12,000 completion payment. He wasn't confused about what he was doing. After I flooded the room, he withheld water. When I blocked the camera, he removed my blanket. He left the therapy pool drain uncovered because someone had told him I was afraid of deep water. His encrypted pager showed 89 daily check-ins. The messages came from a client called North Star. At 4:31 in the afternoon on day 90, North Star sent the release order. Derek had already received his final payment 2 minutes earlier on a green dot card ending in 6031. The instruction included the exact sentence he was supposed to show me. Too much work. Derek knew nothing about Travis's cloned plate, the camera outage, or the donor blood. He didn't know how my pager had been triggered. He never touched Briar Glen's network. Most important, his first recovered message began after I was already locked inside Cedar Vale. Someone else had taken me. The instruction packets called the room Hydro Suite 4B. Same dead wording from the 1,998 plans. Derek had never accessed the vendor archive. He couldn't even name the software we used. Someone had handed him the language, the schedule, the punishments, and me. For a few weeks, Derek's arrest felt like an ending. There was a face, a body, a jail cell. One gap remained. Who had built the room for him? The answer sat inside a deleted diagnostic log recovered from Cedar Vale's service tunnel. Device serial MK 4417C. Administrator Certificate Miles Keene. The log showed remote connections on days 11, 19, 37, 52, 74, and 90. Every date matched an escape attempt or punishment. Miles hadn't simply wired the lock. He watched. On day 11, when I flooded the floor, he logged in for 38 minutes. On day 19, after I smeared peas into the camera, he authorized replacement housing. On day 74, when I dislocated my finger, he ordered Derek to add a second restraint strap. GPS. Fragments from Miles's service van placed it behind Briar Glen during my abduction. 41 minutes later, it appeared near Cedar Vale. Toll camera enhancement caught his face behind the wheel. Derek was home that night. Miles had put the needle through my scrub pants. Miles had folded me beneath hot laundry. Miles had driven me away from the place my mother built while the loading dock camera was blind, or 86 seconds. Agents opened the lock housing from my room and found fluorescent orange heat shrink tubing around the backup line. There were smaller records too. Miles's tablet connected to Cedar Vale at 2:53 in the morning, the night I vanished. Then again at 3:08 in the morning. His service calendar claimed he was replacing a failed door relay at an urgent care clinic in Dublin. That clinic had closed at midnight, and its relay had been replaced 6 weeks earlier. He had also purchased 4 silicone camera domes, 2 battery backups, and a hospital-grade door magnet through a distributor in Dayton. Each item was shipped to a private mailbox, under the name M. Klein. The signature on pickup was a single slanted M. Agents found one of the unused camera domes in his garage attic, still wrapped in foam. A strip of orange tubing was tucked inside the box. 32 millimeters. The same little orange sleeves I had watched Miles cut beside his Klein strippers. Purchase records showed he ordered 200 pieces on June 21st, 17 days before I disappeared. He billed them as an emergency repair, supposedly completed 2 months earlier. That date did something to me. I carried it on a sticky note for weeks. June 21st. I put it beside my toothbrush. I wrote it on the back of grocery receipts. Not because I might forget it, because I wanted the date to stay ugly. Miles built the holding room before anyone knew I was missing. He copied Travis's badge. He cloned the plate. He stole the blood sample and drug vials. He assembled the chopped voicemail recording. Then he volunteered to explain the evidence to police so he could see which pieces they'd found. After I came home, he installed cameras at Paige's house. Of course he did. He attended my competency hearing and sat one row behind my family. He drove Paige to support appointments. At Derek's arraignment, Miles stood near the aisle with his hands folded, watching me identify the man he'd paid to punish me. 11 months after my release, Paige told me they were dating. I vomited in her kitchen sink. She thought it was the medication. Their relationship moved slowly in public. Coffee first, then dinner. Then a photograph at a Columbus Blue Jackets game where Paige wore Miles's jacket and smiled. With both hands around a paper cup. They married on October 8, 2022. 3 years and 2 days after my release. At the wedding, Miles wore a charcoal suit and held my mother's Bible. I stood 14 feet away near a row of white hydrangeas. When he looked at me, his expression didn't shift. Not even a blink. By then, investigators believed they understood his motive. I had blocked the Cedar Vale sale. My disappearance let Paige use emergency authority. Miles controlled a shell company connected to the buyer. He'd kidnap me to get the property. That was already monstrous. It still wasn't the whole plan. The loose end was paperwork. Miles could disable cameras. He could build a locked room. He could hire Derek and watch me through a smoked ceiling lens. But he couldn't invoke the Hart Company agreement, sign as an owner, or approve a sale on day 90. Paige could. Forensic accountants found a deleted folder inside her finance archive. The folder was labeled CV, temporary closure. It contained my work schedule, Travis's badge, history, Briar Glen pharmacy reports, the Cedar Vale plans, and a scanned copy of our LLC agreement. There were also draft press statements dated before I disappeared. One referred to me in the past tense. That wasn't the piece that cracked it open. The printer did. Derek's instruction sheets carried a faint crescent-shaped toner shadow, 18 millimeters, from the lower right corner. Same curve, same distance, same damaged imaging drum as the 27-page dossier Paige had handed detectives to frame Travis. Her HP, LaserJet Pro M404DN, printed both sets. I remembered her complaining about the toner drum. Highway robbery. She had printed the evidence packet for police and the punishment sheets for the man holding me. Records showed. Paige entered Briar Glen's pharmacy at 10:16 at night on the night I was taken. She left, carrying the midazolam later used in the loading dock. She delayed reporting me missing for 3 hours and 22 minutes. Her explanation had been that she thought I'd gone home with a resident's family. The loading dock feed showed something else. Paige sat in her office watching the camera until Miles's van left. Then, the feed cut. My childhood nickname came from her. My fear of deep water came from her. The restaurant, the old photographs, Travis's voicemails, my overnight shift, the fact that I counted ceiling tiles when I was anxious. All of it. She gave Miles the private map of me. The 90 days weren't a rough period. They weren't Derek's estimate, or Miles getting tired, or my resistance wearing them down. Section 11.4 of our company agreement transferred temporary voting authority when one owner had been missing or medically unavailable for 90 consecutive days. At 10:04 in the morning on day 90, Paige invoked it. At 1:40 in the afternoon, she approved Cedar Vale's sale to Marrow Lake Holdings for $3.8 million. The company traced back to Miles. At 4:26 in the afternoon, the first $1.1 million transfer cleared. At 4:29, Derek received his completion payment. At 4:31, Miles ordered my release. 2 minutes. That was the distance between the money reaching their hands and the message telling Derek to dump me beside a truck scale. My behavior had never changed, the end date. The flooding, the broken trays, the finger I pulled out of joint. None of it moved the schedule by 1 hour. Too much work was camouflage. Paige had accessed the Cedar Vale camera portal 312 times during my captivity. 11 sessions lasted longer than 20 minutes. One began 3 minutes after Derek took away my blanket. Another opened while I sat on the floor with my injured hand tucked under my shirt. She watched me. Miles kept 1,146 minutes of footage in a cloud account billed to his personal visa. Investigators believed he saved it as leverage over Paige, proof of her involvement. A leash. Neither of them could cut without hanging the other. Their relationship hadn't begun after my return. It started 4 months before I was taken. The coffee dates, the hockey game, the careful public courtship, those were staged after the fact. By the time Miles held my mother's Bible at the altar, he and Paige had already drugged me, imprisoned me, sold our property, and framed an innocent man. The wedding wasn't a tragic mistake. It was paperwork with flowers. Federal arrest warrants were signed 14 months after the wedding. Miles and Paige disappeared, 36 hours before agents reached their house. They left their phones on the kitchen counter. The garage was empty. Paige's passport had been used in Phoenix, then nowhere. 14 months later, an envelope arrived at my apartment. Postmark, Mesa, Arizona, 85201. Inside was one fluorescent orange heat shrink sleeve cut to exactly 90 millimeters. There was also a contractor badge with Miles's photograph and a different name. Michael Caine. The last item was a glossy photograph of a locked hydrotherapy door at Suncrest Pediatric Rehabilitation. Paige wasn't visible. Her wedding ring was. It appeared in the metal reflection beside the handle, a thin gold oval near the camera. The timestamp was 6 days old. I turned the photograph over. No writing. Then I looked at the door again. Hydro Suite 4B.